There's a specific kind of quiet that happens on a Sunday afternoon after your grandkids have gone home. Not the peaceful kind, the other kind. The kind where you walk back into the living room and there's a juice box on the coffee table and a small sock behind the couch, and the house still smells a little like them, and you stand there for a second not quite knowing what to do with your hands. Most people have felt that. Not many people talk about it. But here's the thing nobody tells you. That feeling doesn't go away when the grandkids stop being little. It gets more complicated. Because when they're small, they still need you in this very immediate, very physical way. You're the juice box getter. You're the Band-Aid person. You know where everything is and how everything works, and you are, in their eyes, genuinely magic. And then, slowly, they grow up, and you stay the same person, and they stop needing the magic. That's not a complaint. That's just what growing up is. But nobody hands you a pamphlet for what happens on your end. The research on this is actually striking. Loneliness among adults over 60 has been called a public health epidemic. That's not a dramatic phrase someone made up. That's the language the U.S. Surgeon General used in an official advisory. And one of the least discussed drivers of that loneliness is what happens in the later stages of grandparenthood. Not the early years, when you're swimming in visits and sticky fingers and being asked to read the same book 12 times. The later years, when the grandkids hit 13, 14, 15, and suddenly have an entire world that has nothing to do with you. When they're 18 and gone. When they're 22 and living somewhere you've never been, and dating someone you've never met, and texting you back 2 days after you texted them, with a message that says, "Sorry, Grandma, been crazy busy, love you," which, for the record, is a perfectly normal thing for a 22-year-old to do. But that doesn't mean it doesn't land like a small punch. Here's what makes this particular kind of loneliness so hard to name. You're not supposed to feel it. That's the trap. Society has a script for grieving big losses. A spouse, a parent, a diagnosis. People bring casseroles. People check in. But nobody brings a casserole because your granddaughter started driving herself to school and doesn't need you to pick her up anymore. There's no ritual for the moment you realize you haven't been asked to babysit in 8 months. There's no support group for feeling irrelevant to someone you love more than you can say, especially when that someone is absolutely fine and doesn't realize anything has shifted. So you don't say anything, because what would you say? I miss being needed? That sounds needy. I feel left out of their lives? That sounds like you're guilting someone. So you fold the feeling up and put it somewhere and get on with things. And that works more or less until it doesn't. The folding up is the problem. Because what you're folding up is real. The connection you had with those grandkids, especially in the early years, especially in those long, unhurried afternoons that your own kids never gave you because your own kids grew up when you were still stretched thin from working and managing and just surviving. That connection was genuinely one of the most meaningful things in your life. That's not sentimentality. That's neuroscience. Caregiving relationships release oxytocin. They create purpose. They give your days a shape. When that fades, something real fades with it, and your body and your brain notice, even when your pride doesn't want to admit it. What's worth understanding is that this loneliness tends to arrive exactly when several other things are also shifting. Retirement, if you haven't already, the health stuff that starts stacking up, the slow narrowing of your social world, friends who moved, friends who got sick, friends you lost, the marriage that either got better or got more exposed when the busyness stopped, the way your own kids, your actual children, are now deep in the thick of it, careers, mortgages, school pickups, exhaustion, and don't have a lot of bandwidth for checking in with you unless something is wrong. So they assume, since you haven't said anything is wrong, that nothing is wrong. Loneliness is famously bad at announcing itself. It tends to show up dressed as other things: irritability, a shorter fuse than you used to have, drinking a little more than you should, watching more television than you mean to, sleeping too long or not long enough, a general flatness. Not depression necessarily, not the kind that comes with a clinical name, but a low-grade dimming of things that used to feel more lit up. That's what the research points to. That's what people describe when someone finally asks them the right questions. And here's the cruelest part of this particular loneliness. The people best positioned to notice it are the people you're least likely to tell. Your adult kids are busy, and you don't want to be a burden. Your doctor sees you for 12 minutes and is already reaching for the door when you're still mid-sentence. Your friends are navigating their own version of the same fog. And the grandkids themselves, they're not doing anything wrong. They're doing exactly what they're supposed to do, which is grow up and build a life. You'd be horrified if they didn't. You raised their parents, after all. You know what healthy looks like. This is healthy. It just hurts anyway. So what do you actually do with that? First thing, and I know this sounds almost insultingly simple, is name it. Actually name it to yourself, clearly. Not, I'm just a little blue, or I guess I'm getting older, or I just need to stay busier, but I am lonely, the specific kind of lonely that comes from having been deeply needed and then being needed less. That's a real thing. It has a shape, and naming it matters because it stops you from being baffled by your own mood. It stops you from sitting in the pharmacy line wondering why you feel like crying over nothing, when actually you feel like crying over something very specific. Second thing, and this one's harder, is to resist the story that says your role is over, because that story is wrong, and it's also early. The grandkids who are 13 and 15 and have no time for you right now, they're going to be 31 and 33 someday. They're going to hit a wall they don't know how to climb, and they're going to need someone with a longer view of things. They're going to have a bad marriage or a hard diagnosis or a career that fell apart, and they're going to want to talk to someone who has actually lived through something. That person is you. You're not at the end of the story. You're in a slow chapter. Those aren't the same thing. Third thing, and this is where I'll sound like a friend who's slightly exasperated with you, because that's the role I'm playing. You cannot wait for them to come to you. Not because they don't love you, but because they're 22 and they don't know what they're missing yet. They don't understand, not really, that you have a window. That the years when you're healthy and sharp and capable of a real relationship with them are not unlimited. They'll understand it someday. They just don't yet. So you have to be a little proactive. You have to reach toward them even when it feels strange or one-sided. What does that look like? It looks different for every family, but the stuff that works tends to share a few qualities. It's specific rather than general. Not, you should call more, but, I'm making that chili you like, come over Sunday. It's curious rather than nostalgic, asking about their actual current life instead of referencing the past they're trying to move beyond. It's low pressure. It doesn't require them to perform affection or pretend to have time they don't have. The best grandparent relationships at this stage tend to look less like the early years, you at the center, essential, and more like a friendship between unequals, where one person has a lot more experience and a lot more patience. That shift requires something of you. It requires letting go of the version of the relationship you had when they were small, which was real and beautiful, and is over now, and building a new one that fits who they are at 20 or 25 or 30. That's grief work, genuinely. Not the big kind, not the kind that comes with a ceremony, but the small, ongoing kind that nobody tells you is part of this. And while you're doing that, here's something else worth saying. The loneliness that comes from the grandkids growing up is real, but it's also pointing at something broader. Because if your sense of purpose and connection has been resting almost entirely on your family, on being needed by your kids and grandkids, then you're building on a foundation that was always going to shift. Families change. Grandkids grow up. Your kids get absorbed in their own lives. That's not failure. That's family. The question is, what else is there? This is the conversation that actually matters, and it's the one most people over 60 are not having with themselves, because it sounds too philosophical for a Tuesday, and because it requires admitting that the next decade or two needs to be built, not just lived through. That there are choices to be made about who you're going to be now that the old roles have changed shape. Some people find that terrifying. Some people find it, once they sit with it, quietly exhilarating. Because here's the thing about being in your 60s or your early 70s. You know who you are in a way you absolutely did not at 40. You know what you like. You know what you can't stand. You know which friendships fill you up and which ones drain you. You know what work feels meaningful and what work is just noise. That self-knowledge is genuinely rare. A lot of people spend their whole lives chasing it. You have it. The question is whether you're using it. The research on what actually protects older adults from the worst effects of loneliness is not complicated. It comes down to a handful of close relationships that feel genuinely mutual, something to do that feels meaningful, even if it's small, volunteering, mentoring, a project, a practice, and some sense of autonomy over how your days are shaped. That's it. Not a full social calendar, not constant contact with family, not a partner necessarily, though that helps when it's a good one. Just a few real connections, a sense of purpose, and a feeling that your life is yours to direct. What's interesting is that loneliness doesn't actually require isolation to do its damage. You can be surrounded by people, family, neighbors, a spouse, and still be functionally lonely. The loneliness that's been getting attention from researchers lately isn't about quantity of contact. It's about quality. It's about whether anyone in your life actually knows you, knows what you're worried about right now, what you're proud of, what you regret, what you're still trying to figure out. If the answer is, not really, that's worth sitting with. And for a lot of people at this age, especially men, it should be said, though this isn't only about men, the honest answer is that nobody really knows them. Not anymore. Their spouse knows a version of them. Their kids know them mostly through their parental role. But the interior life, the ongoing conversation about what's meaningful and what isn't, what's left and what's possible, a lot of people are having that conversation entirely alone. And that is a specific kind of lonely that has nothing to do with how often the grandkids call. Making friends after 50 is awkward. There's no way to dress that up. The easy pathways of early adulthood, school, young parenthood, early careers, neighborhoods full of young families, those pathways mostly don't exist anymore. You have to be a little more intentional, a little more willing to feel like an idiot, a little more patient with the fact that real friendships take time, even when they don't feel like they're going anywhere at first. But it's possible. People do it. The ones who do are measurably better off in almost every health metric. Loneliness has real physical consequences, which is a whole other conversation. But the short version is that it shortens your life in ways that compare to smoking. That's not a metaphor. That's a number from actual studies. So the granddaughter who's texting you back 2 days late, that's not the whole story. She's part of the story. She matters. The relationship is worth tending, but she cannot be the whole answer. And somewhere in you, you already know that. The loneliness you feel on Sunday afternoon when they've gone home isn't just about them. It's asking you a bigger question. What else is yours? What else are you building? Who else knows you? The grandkids growing up is a clock. Not a cruel one. They're supposed to grow up. They should grow up. You wanted this. But a clock nonetheless. And the thing about a clock is that it tells you something about time, that it's passing, that the window you have to build a life that's actually yours, Not the parent version, not the grandparent version, but the full complexity, I know who I am version. That window is open right now. So walk back into that living room. Pick up the small sock. Smile at the juice box, because you're going to miss finding juice boxes someday in the way you miss things that are already over. And then think about who you're going to call, not out of loneliness, but out of intention. Think about what you've been meaning to do that you've been putting off because you were busy with everyone else's life. Think about what it would mean to be known again, or maybe for the first time, by someone who isn't related to you. The quiet house isn't a punishment, it's an opening. What you do with it is still yours to decide.